Okay. So rather than just give a whole presentation, what I'm trying to really do is articulate some things that are really hard to articulate. So going point by point is good. Like I just want to make sure everyone gets what I'm talking about. Because it's pretty abstract. It's not that it's complicated. It's just abstract stuff. And feel free to jump in at any time. But I'll start with the aims of this talk. So I want to give kind of a basic explanation of how this theory that we call the unifying theory of reality allows us to bridge mind with matter in a way that we couldn't do before. And that's basically because the old paradigms kind of just ignored consciousness, not kind of, as a principle. They just thought that subjective experience wasn't part of science because science measures the objective world. Of course, you can get objective measures of pain when someone's in pain. That's a real thing that's happening. They're experiencing the pain subjectively, but you can see behavioral signs that they're in pain. You can do neuroimaging and see pain, and then you can give them measures that allow them to express the severity of pain, and you do that at the doctor. So this model doesn't try to reduce everything to particle physics, which is what most physics theories of everything do. It says that we need to have a non-reductive physicalism or non-reductive naturalism. And really, I don't even think we need to be attached to the word physicalism because it creates a boundary in our mind where we exclude certain phenomena like consciousness. It was specifically, people thought consciousness wasn't part of science because it would seem to be something subjective and therefore non-physical. So we need to expand our understanding of what physical is, physical things or natural things are. And we need to include a new language when we're talking about minds. We're talking about these simulations. We're talking about these world models. And so if you can just take that concept of brains encoding world models that create these real-time simulations, that's what consciousness is, then you can start to put consciousness in the physical picture in a way that you can mathematize and formalize. And we're not reducing consciousness to math. It's still this thing that you have this, experience that kind of transcends the basic physical world. But anything that exists, you can start to formalize. You can start to look at the dynamics of that thing. So that's what this theory tries to do, is take the mind as this dynamical structure, this dynamical system, and try to start understanding the physical dynamics of how it works. And it works according to laws that are different than the laws that govern the inanimate world. Inanimate objects follow Newtonian equations where minds and agents, biological phenomena are goal directed inherently. So they move along paths that can't be predicted with Newtonian mechanics. The equations don't work. So if it's a dead body at the top of a hill and there's a big, storm and a gust of wind blows that body, it's going to roll down the hill to the bottom. If it's a living body, let's say the person's asleep, consciousness is basically shut down. They're going to roll down the hill, and then they're probably going to wake up, and then they're going to resist that motion and push back. And they're able to do that, we understand now, because of metabolism. And we basically eat food, and that's energy that gets stored, and we can use that energy. So living systems are self-propelled systems. It's a whole different type of dynamic than the inanimate world. So with this model, it tries to solve these problems, like the hard problem of consciousness and the mind-body problem that we thought were impossible. Because for that reason, we kept consciousness, out of and how this non-physical, this something immaterial, move the physical world. Now we're understanding it's not really immaterial. It's kind of immaterial, but it's an informational structure. And that's what was missing from the paradigm, this concept of information. So information starts being able to push things around. And then it's not a story of particles, it's a story of emergent phenomena. And then you have these holistic systems that encoded this information and um, that animates the system with something like a vital force, something like an elan vital. But now we just use the language of information to talk about that teleological goal-directed motion. So you can already see how it's a talk about consciousness, but it's also a talk about the limitations of naturalistic frameworks. So in this crowd, we're not calling ourselves materialists or physicalists. We're past that. We've transcended that. We understand that that's basic materialism is going to write consciousness off as an illusion, and then that just dodges the problem, and then that reduces us to zombies or NPCs. What does that mean? I don't understand the illusionist position where people are denying their own existence and agency. Seems, pretty self-contradictory to me. So we need some sort of framework that transcends basic materialism, and the UTOK framework, extended naturalism, the kind of paradigm, I guess, of the core theory that this conference is based on, attempts to extend physicalism in this way, where it's non-reductive and you're putting consciousness into the picture and agency and all of these things I've talked about. The only potential thing to worry about with that approach is anytime you're calling the framework naturalistic, it's attempting to be a comprehensive framework of all phenomena that exist in the world. And because we're always learning more about reality and finding out it doesn't work the way we think it does, that word naturalism can be misleading sometimes and blind us to things that are considered supernatural. And then we might learn that they actually exist. For example, parapsychology phenomena like ESP. We might start detecting that in experiments. Some people like Dean Radin think they have statistical proof that such things exist. Then it just gets absorbed by the naturalistic framework. But then you have a framework that's just constantly getting extended. And so then you have to kind of have an epistemology that recognizes that there's this boundary, there's this epistemic horizon, which simply means like our paradigm constrains how we can understand the world. And there's always going to be phenomena that either exist right now or emerge in the future that challenge our natural framework and force it to extend. So the opening question, I think we can actually approach the science in a new way. I think we can make it a story of puzzles, and we just have these mysteries that exist, and then we try to solve them, and there's a way to kind of tie them all together. But I think the main puzzle of existence is well, it's called the puzzle of existence, but it's the puzzle that one finds themselves questioning when they look up in the night sky and they see this giant universe that seems largely meaningless and purposeless. And it looks like life is only in this small corner of the world, which can make one feel insignificant. But then at the same time, you realize, wow, this giant universe gave rise to me, a being that can contemplate these kinds of existential questions. What does it all mean? Is there purpose to existence? And then that presents a paradox, especially when science starts getting developed and we start having neuroscience and psychology. We start understanding that the ability to question existence is a super complicated cognitive ability. It's a computational capacity that's not trivial. it takes a lot to build up that kind of complexity. So the puzzle of existence is, in a universe that's supposed to tend toward disorder, as a rule, how did it create these agents that are complex enough to be able to ask the question, why do we exist? Is there purpose? Is there meaning to it? So this means that the theory of everything we need is a new kind of theory. It's not these grand unified theories. It needs to be that too. But string theory and loop quantum gravity don't even attempt to address consciousness. They kind of exclude it from the physical picture. And that's not good because it really excludes all emergent phenomena. So life, mind, culture, technology, all of that is not explained by these theories of everything. So I think a TOE, a true TOE, needs to be an EFE, an explanation for everything. So it has to explain all these emergent phenomena. And so it must be non-reductive. And yeah, we talked about that. So it needs to be a theory of everything that somehow ties consciousness to quantum mechanics and general relativity, thermodynamics, all that stuff. So let's just briefly mention the demarcation problem again. So this specific problem is a mystery. How do you draw, what's the boundary between science and non-science? So that would separate, physics from metaphysics and natural from supernatural and science from pseudoscience. So like, how do you know where to draw that line? And Karl Popper, who's famous for his work on the philosophy of science and epistemology, thought that this was, really hard problem, potentially unsolvable. So what I'm trying to argue is that it is a formally undecidable problem in the sense that there are these statements that like Gödel kind of made famous, these self-referential statements like, I am lying, that can't be proven one way or the other. So with this, basically, the problem is you can't draw that boundary because you don't know what's out there because you're limited by your epistemic horizon. So, for example, entanglement. This is the best example, like quantum mechanics, superposition and entanglement. It didn't just expand the Newtonian paradigm. It fundamentally changed how we think about causality. So if someone didn't have this mathematical theory, and really if they didn't have the experimental evidence from like the double slit experiment, and someone tried to say, yeah, the universe works in this non-local way, there's entanglement, spooky action at distance, there's things in the really small things are in multiple places at once, superposition, it would sound crazy. I mean, it would just be entirely indistinguishable from magic. So there's this famous quote by the science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke that says, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I would say that also can be translated into any sufficiently advanced science is indistinguishable from magic. So these mechanisms, we would just have absolutely no way to judge them. And actually we would dismiss quantum theory as violating causality. But really it just expanded how we think about causality. It just doesn't work exactly the way that we thought it did on every level, at least. So the placebo effect, this idea that, take a sugar pill and it could, if you believe it's reducing pain, it can reduce your pain. These positive psychology in general, when I was in undergrad, like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, these things were not even fully accepted. There were definitely a lot of people arguing meditation was woo. There's still some skeptics who are still trying to hold on to that. I don't know why. They're willing to die on a cross for stuff that we understand, but free will. You'll hear a lot of people, a lot of Sabine Hossenfelder, Jerry Coyne, a lot of people say free will is a ridiculous idea, but we'll see in this talk, free will is just this higher level agency that you get with these self-aware systems. So these systems that have not just mind one, but mind two, and perhaps higher mind. So mind one's like kind of subconscious. Mind two is like your conscious reflective mind. This is system one, system two. For anyone who knows Daniel Kahneman's fast and slow thinking, if you become aware that you have this hierarchical multi-level controller mind, then that would seem to create a sort of mind 3 or mind 2b. And so talking about these concepts like free will that were once considered magical, we see now that we just didn't have the framework to understand high-level causality. Top-down causation is like a big field now where people are explaining a philosophical concept now with information theory. So Stu Kaufman, famous complexity theorist, has a model of ESP that works through quantum entanglement, sort of like entangled brains or cognitive systems. Who knows if it's true? The point is, could be. And if we find out that it's true, all the people that laughed at it, now it's going to become science. And then they'll say, well, we weren't wrong. It was just science. We just didn't know. Well, that's the whole point. You can't dismiss you can dismiss certain stuff, but you have to keep an open mind. Everything has to be tested, but we're constantly going to be surprised. So my group has been trying to create a kind of fun packaging for it where we call this Woo, like Wu-Tang, the rap group Wu-Tang Clan, instead of Woo. So Woo is, false stuff. It's fake stuff that doesn't exist. Like, you have snake oil salesmen trying to sell you crystals, tell you it's going to cure your cancer, actually becomes really dangerous to that point because, for example, I think Andy Kaufman, maybe even Steve Jobs, invasive stuff because, they didn't want to go the invasive direction first. And had they gone with standard medicine earlier, they might have survive. So, pseudoscience can be very dangerous, but at the same time, we might be blinding ourselves to a lot of important and maybe significant to medical, phenomena we just don't understand. Yeah, there's a story by why we I won't go into that now. But demarcation discovery, since there's no boundary between science and non-science, then it creates a sort of game where we're always trying to figure out like what's real and what's not. We're trying to push that boundary. What's the magic that exists that we don't know about? I can't see a clock. So Marcia, can you remind me?
Yeah.
Can you tell me what time it is and what time I have to finish?
3:50. I mean, you have the freedom to go as long as we leave some time for questions, discussions. And I'm sure
how much time do I have left?
This is not super fixed. The session goes until 4:30. It's an hour long.
Okay, so 40 minutes. So I'll just try to wrap this up in 20 minutes. So we'll have at least 20 minutes to talk. Okay. So, and if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand, and I can't see everybody, but Marcia can moderate and cut me off. So any questions at any time, please interrupt. But Wi-Fi, spooky action at a distance. How the heck would anybody, like with Newton's framework, if we showed Newton a garage door opener, after we explained it to him, he'd understand it. Like, that's brilliant. I completely understand it. Probably understand it better than the inventor and probably create some new sort of technology based on that. But when you first show Newton a garage door opener and you're like, bzz, you press a button and then the metal door opens, that's a wand. That's wizardry. I mean, and in his paradigm, there'd be no explanation for it because in Newtonian mechanics, electromagnetism wasn't even part of the model. That didn't really become a formal thing later till Michael Faraday's experiments, and then Maxwell formalized it. So we never know what sort of magic's out there. So I would exercise caution, to anyone dismissing everything outright because it sounds like woo. That's not just a mistake. It is a huge mistake. It turns people off. We can't open the door to all kinds of pseudoscience, but actually, I think this is what we need because it says, hey, some of that stuff can be true, but we got to take a very cautious approach at the same time. Then you don't get this situation where it's like all or nothing, like you accept all of the magic or you're just like a materialist and like all that stuff's ridiculous. And if you have people who are, dynamic thinkers and they can see the truth in this demarcation problem and this kind of magic proof, then people will start being a lot more careful about what they believe because they'll be like, okay, this kind of magical thing, like teach me this. Maybe it's a imagery maybe it's a practice where a kind of a law of attraction thing, and it's working for you because you're imagining yourself. Maybe you want to be an actor and you're imagining yourself in Hollywood and you're picturing, the area, and you're like, oh, walking into a coffee shop. Oh, these directors hang out at this coffee shop. I'm going to get a job there, and then I'm going to hand them my scripts after I make friends with them. And you're doing all this stuff that's creating, a clear causal path to that goal that works. So there's this magic in these psychotechnologies. And then you can be like, oh, but you're telling me, oh, you can use this, and then I'm going to get a check in the mail from a stranger and I'm going to become a millionaire. Because the books actually say that kind of stuff happens too. Then you can cut through the bullshit and actually leave room open for these surprises of nature. So to talk about the unifying theory of reality quickly, basically it says that the universe is not this kind of static clockwork machine universe, the Newtonian model wearing down because of the second law of thermodynamics, that it's actual. And I will say Newton didn't believe this. Laplace pretty much made that, applied Newtonian mechanics to these existential, questions, and said the universe is just this clockwork. Newton was super religious and thought there were like hidden, mysteries in the Bible, all of this stuff. So it's not really Newton's idea. So it's kind of unfair to call it Newtonian, but this Laplace's idea of a purely Newtonian universe. Kelvin was also a mystic, and he created the second law of thermodynamics, applied it to the universe, but he always thought that life could counter this law. So that got lost in history because atheists with an agenda came and basically whitewashed history, scraped religion from Gödel. Great book on Gödel. I got a book on Gödel, autobiography on the mathematician Gödel. And then I went to look for anything about religion, or he had a God proof. He tried to prove God, and a proof that he believes was successful. That's a mathematical proof. They call it the existence proof. Because it's pretty abstract. They try to get God out of the picture. None of that was in Gödel's autobiography. It was completely omitted. So there's been this whitewashing, not just of like those facts about scientists being religious, spiritual, mystical. Sir Arthur Eddington, who said, had the quote that people quote about the second law being this thing that can't be violated. He called himself a rational mystic. It was also that the laws basically have been hijacked and put into a narrative that advances an atheist agenda when that was opposed to the intentions of their creators. So I'm not saying that, we should adopt necessarily like an intelligent design worldview, but a deist model of the universe is not anti-scientific, and we have been misled about a lot of these laws, and they don't. For example, the second law doesn't guarantee heat death. There's just, if you understand cosmic expansion, and basically there could be potentially an unlimited source of free energy for life to use to power computation. It is not certain that heat death is inevitable. And if anyone wants to check that out, I wrote an article for our website called Noema, Life Need Not Ever End. And I quoted David Deutsch and Stu Kaufman and other people who have said the same thing. And David Deutsch tweeted it and defended it to a commenter. So yeah, the heat death thing, you're getting that from people who don't know as much physics as the people who are saying that that's not necessarily proven theory. So with this universe, basically, it's a creative universe. It's not a static universe. In this model, it's kind of basically like a generative system. It's a creative system that becomes more complex through learning. So in this model, evolution is a learning process. And basically, so just to explain that, when organisms, so think about the biosphere as this network of all these interconnected organisms, and then they're making copies, and the copies, because of genetic mutation, are going to have different design plans. nature is just generating all these different designs. You could think about them as designs for living. So designs for systems that stay in existence against the tendency towards disorder. And this process of variation and selection, so you have all these designs, then you have natural selection. You have this, and it's not just things that are competing for survival. Even if things weren't competing, if we had all of the energy that we needed, if we have all the food and resources, we wouldn't be competing against each other, but we would be competing against this second law of thermodynamics. We still have to make sure we get that energy. You could be the last person on earth and you would still have this struggle against Shiva is the metaphor that applies to that. So it's the Hindu god of thermodynamics. So the struggle for existence is really a struggle against the second law's tendency towards entropic decay, or the struggle against Shiva. And using the religious metaphor, it's just to compress things, just so you can start talking about these things with less words. Basically, there's a new theory in neuroscience called the Bayesian brain hypothesis, and this has been expanded to apply to systems that don't have brains. So living single-celled organisms, they're learning in the same way, but basically you're trying things out, actions in the world, you're experimenting, and if something doesn't work, you miss a ball when you try to hit it with a bat, or a baby reaches for its milk bottle and misses. Any sort of mistake you make, you self-correct. You eliminate that little idea, that belief, that theory, and you replace it. You try something else, and when you find something that works, you make that part of your model. So you can imagine the entire biosphere as doing this sort of self-updating, except instead of, in your brain, all these little neural circuits, there's this kind of Darwinian process where these groups of neurons are kind of competing to find the best explanation of reality. You can think of the whole process of evolution as producing all these designs. Natural selection filters out the ones that don't work. So the biosphere as a whole entity is learning in the same way that your brain is learning. So then evolution itself just becomes a process of learning, of Bayesian learning, and it's this hierarchical process. It builds a biosphere that is nested. You have single-celled organisms, and you have multicellular organisms made of single-celled organisms. Then you have ecosystems made of multicellular organisms and single-celled organisms. And then you have a global biosphere, which has this noosphere on top of it from human civilization and our technology. And this picture says it's just one thing. Art, everything that's created is just you get beyond organisms when you start creating art, but art is basically representations of ideas, memes, presented in a form where it could be shared with the collective. So in this model, everything that is a product of humanity is a part of this evolutionary process, and it builds the biosphere as a hierarchical structure because it's the most robust. It's decentralized, it's distributed across layers. This is why, for example, when Rome falls, or society collapses, there's communities that have another layer of structure, and then they can just self-organize. So evolution is not just learning, it's multi-level learning. It's hierarchical. And what I'm arguing is in this UTOK, this tree of knowledge system that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, these layers represent emergences that were what has been called strong emergence. That's really a word for causal emergence. So there's a change in the causal structure of reality. And we see that the biosphere learning is not just an biological evolutionary process. It's part of a larger cosmic process. And this theory says the universe is learning. So the biosphere is really the edge of the universe's computational machinery and architecture. So we can see culture, this whole thing in the reductionist view is just an accidental thing that's transient and just fortunately appeared on the biosphere due to an unlikely statistical combination of molecules in a warm soup. But actually, that's not really what happened. the Earth basically generated life inevitably in these hydrothermal vents or hot springs or somewhere, but basically it just creates the thermodynamic conditions creates these chemical autocatalytic, like self-sustaining sets, and then it just continuously grows. And you see this trend towards progress because progress can't be stopped because it's building up a robust architecture and it's always error correcting. So in this model, the second law of thermodynamics is reframed the struggle for existence that Darwin and everybody commented on. That's really reframed as in a thermodynamic way, the struggle against the second law. Life's performing inference. So life or evolution is an inference engine. The second law is not this thing that says, the universe is indifferent to life. It's actually, in this framework, the machine learning challenge that the universe presents to itself, to life, its most complex manifestation. And it's what forces them to learn and accumulate these adaptations. So then we have a principle: problems create progress. Now, a lot of people in the 20th century said try to kill the idea of progress. They were trying to kill teleology. They were trying to kill spirituality. It was really an atheist agenda. It was a postmodern, nihilistic agenda that tried to say evolution wasn't progressive. It's absolutely progressive if you zoom out and you look at it at the scale of the biosphere. There's mass extinctions. That's part of this model. The mass extinctions are basically like tryouts. So imagine a football team and you're continuously trying the players and you're cutting the weak ones. And then through this continual Bayesian updating process, you get a maximally robust biosphere that you can't kill. Nothing can kill life. Even if a giant asteroid, hit the Earth and killed all complex life, it wouldn't kill all of the bacteria and stuff living inside the planet. But if you get to this stage we're at too, even an asteroid won't stop us. In the next 100 years, perhaps even now, unless we have a situation like the movie Don't Look Up. But like in 100 years, any sort of cosmic threat that comes our way, we can pretty much handle, and we will, because the existential imperative to survive becomes sort of this cosmic function. And this is just saying, don't look at life as an accident, something inside the universe. Look at life as a manifestation of the universe. And in this picture, the universe is a computational structure. It's like a neural network. It's specifically a DAG. It's a directed acyclic graph. You can model the universe as a neural network and you get a really clear picture of existence. You explain teleology as cosmic learning. We have this struggle against the second law that forces us to continually learn, but it's not just an individual fight against this. We form collectives naturally because of synergy. Basically, there's a thermodynamic benefit to working together because it makes everybody's thermodynamic task easier. So there's this natural force that's basically fueling multi-level self-organization. And this is against the limited materialist, reductionist worldview where they just deny that consciousness exists. This says consciousness emerges because you have systems that have to model the environment. They're encoding information. They're building up that information through adaptations and through individual learning, like adaptive learning during one's lifetime. It's been a 4 billion year process of building up these models, and more organisms and more complex niches need more complex models to survive. So then we have a physical picture where you can get consciousness by an organism simulating the world. And then if they have a brain, they record the consequences of their causal actions. So then you start to build a model of yourself as a causal entity, and then you build a self model. And this paradigm argues that's where the subjective experience emerges from. The observer only comes in the stage when you have brains, because prior to that, you're building up a model of the world, but you're not building a self model because a genome doesn't update in the way brains do. There's a little bit of learning, like epigenetic learning, but it's not recording the consequences of each action, so you don't get a robust self model. So it's really, think of world models like mind one are the lowest version of that, as creating a simulation of the world, as that being equivalent to like a theater that there's no one sitting in the theater. So when you start to self model, it creates an observer, puts someone watching the theater. And so then this keeps going on. Like we become aware of this mind one and two. We have the unconscious mind, the conscious mind that monitors and regulates mind one. And then when you see mind one and mind two, that automatically is going to create something that's meta to that, maybe like a mind three or a mind 2B. You guys, probably have thought about how to, I think Greg calls it 2B, layman's talk. Maybe you got into like mind four, I heard. So this is interesting too, because it goes back to this demarcation problem. Here's what I'm arguing. Every time we become aware of these systems in our mind, it builds another mind. So the moment you understand your mind, it automatically creates a new phenomenon that you don't understand. And it's actually a new phenomenon in nature. There's new causal dynamics. When you have this meta awareness in this mind three, there's a new dynamic inside your brain that's actually pushing your scientific framework to always expand. So there's this weird Gödelian loop where like we keep understanding ourselves, but in understanding ourselves, we create a new phenomenon that is going to, again, require us to understand that. So it just continuously expands. So the picture here is of a fundamentally creative universe that's always transcending itself and its own laws. So I'll kind of leave with that, but I will say, if we want to talk about it, like we have the mathematics for this theory now. So the UTOR has a modified Schrodinger equation, and I'll tell you why we're excited about this. So check this out. The idea is we hear that wave function collapse is like random. You see this random collapse. We don't know why it goes to one state or another, but there's this statistical pattern that emerges with repeated measures where you start to see the Born rule. You start to get predictable. You can predict stuff, but not in any single trial. But over time, you can predict these patterns will emerge. We're saying that's because the universe is basically a neural network and that it needs this global attractor term. And so basically, this is saying the way we're learning and optimizing at a basic level, the universe is doing this, and that the wave function collapse isn't random. And actually, if it's not a system that's artificially isolated, like in laboratory conditions, and it's interacting with the regular world, what's happening is when you measure a quantum system, it's becoming entangled, not just with the measurement apparatus, it's becoming entangled with the observer, the apparatus, and the informational structure that observer's nested in, and potentially the whole interconnected universe. So basically, this is saying that we need to understand wave function collapse as being part of universal cosmic learning. And it does create a dynamic where there's this fundamental global telos that's encoded in nature. It's doing Bayesian learning. It's doing gradient descent. It's basically minimizing its free energy as a full system. And that's why you see this trend towards complexity and progress. So yeah, I'll stop there. And I would say that Kurzweil's thing, his map is exactly like the tree of knowledge, except it has two more levels. And I'm arguing that these are basically predetermined in a way, even though there's freedom for stuff to happen within that. The trajectory of evolution is constrained to this general path. It's not deterministic in the old sense. It's indeterministic, actually, and that's what allows for freedom and agency and free will. But that these two stages that haven't happened yet, it's full of magic. This is stuff that's going to transcend even extended naturalism, and that's what we really need to find out. We need to be hunting magic. What kind of mystical properties of nature can we unlock with these advanced scientific models? That's all.